Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a fascinating secret about human behavior. We're going to reveal the hidden consumption math that quietly dictates our everyday choices. Whether you realize it or not, your brain is constantly running these incredibly complex equations every time you eat, shop, or decide how to spend your time. Today, we're going to decode those equations, and I promise we're going to make them simple enough for anyone to understand. Okay, picture this. You are absolutely starving. You order your all-time favorite pizza, and that very first bite of the first slice is just absolute perfection, right? A total flavor explosion. But flash forward maybe 20 minutes, you're reaching for your fourth, maybe your fifth slice. It's the exact same pizza, the exact same ingredients, baked at the exact same time. Yet somehow, that fifth slice just doesn't taste quite as magical as the first one did. Why is that? Well, economics actually has a precise mathematical answer to this universal feeling, and by the end of this explainer, you'll know exactly how to calculate it yourself. All right, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Defining economic utility. 2. Marginal utility. 3. Total utility. And 4. The point of satiation. Section 1. Defining economic utility. So what exactly is utility? According to our source material, the baseline definition of utility is simply the capacity of a commodity to satisfy a human want. In other words, it's an item's want-satisfying power. Now, there's a really crucial distinction we have to make here in economics. Utility is absolutely not the same thing as usefulness. For example, a healthy vitamin is obviously very useful for your body, but it might have very low utility if you don't actually want to take it. Utility is purely about the psychological power of an item to satisfy a craving in that exact moment. It really doesn't matter if it's a slice of pizza, a piece of chocolate, or anything else. If you crave it, it has utility. Section 2. Marginal utility, or MU. The joy of the next bite. Marginal utility is defined as the additional utility derived from the consumption of an extra unit of a commodity. Let's relate this back to our pizza. Your marginal utility is the exact amount of joy, the specific boost in satisfaction that you get from eating just one additional slice. We're not talking about the whole meal here. It's all about the margin, the next unit, that very next bite. So, how do we actually calculate that extra joy? The formula might look like some intense algebra at first glance, but it's remarkably simple. It's mu sub n equals tu sub n minus tu sub n minus 1. Let's break those variables down. N is just the current slice of pizza you're eating. Let's say it's your third slice. Mu sub n is the marginal utility of that third slice. To find that out, you just take the total utility of all 3 slices you've eaten so far, which is tu sub n, and you subtract the total utility you had just a moment ago, right after finishing your second slice, which is tu sub n minus 1. The difference between those two totals? That's the exact amount of joy that third slice just gave you. Let's see how this plays out with some real numbers from our source material, which tracks the consumption of mangoes. But keep in mind, this math applies universally, whether it's mangoes, chocolate, or our pizza. Economists actually measure this satisfaction in hypothetical units they playfully call utils. Look at the first unit consumed. It gives you 10 utils of total satisfaction, meaning its marginal utility is 10. But watch what happens when you consume the second unit. Your total utility goes up to 17. By applying our formula 17 minus 10, we see the marginal utility of that second unit was only 7. For the third unit, total utility hits 21. 21 minus 17 means the marginal utility has dropped to 4. And by the fourth unit, you only get 1 extra util of joy. This perfectly maps to our universal real-world experience, doesn't it? Every successive unit yields a smaller and smaller bump in satisfaction. Economists call this the law of diminishing marginal utility. Section 3. Total utility, or TU. The macro view. Total utility is defined as the sum total of satisfaction derived by a consumer after consuming all units of a commodity during a given period. Think of it this way. If marginal utility is the specific joy of the individual slice, total utility is the grand total of your happiness at the end of the entire sitting. It's the overall subjective benefit you receive from the whole experience. Mathematically, this is literally just an addition problem. Total utility equals the marginal utility of the first unit plus the marginal utility of the second unit, and so on, all the way to the final unit you consumed. Or, written even more elegantly at the bottom, Tu equals sigma u. You just add up the individual joy of every single slice you ate, and boom, that equals your total utility. Section 4. The point of satiation. The climax of consumption. And this brilliantly illustrates the absolute climax of our eating experience. Notice how the top curve, the total utility curve, rises rapidly at first, and then it starts to flatten out at the top of the hill. At the exact same time, the bottom curve, our marginal utility, starts high and slopes straight downward toward the zero line. That top curve is your overall fullness and happiness. The bottom curve is the thrill of the next bite fading away. We know that each new bite gives us a little less joy than the last, while our total joy keeps slowly creeping up. But what happens when we push the math just a bit too far? Let's contrast these two phases. As long as marginal utility is positive, meaning that bottom line is above zero, your total utility is increasing. You're still gaining satisfaction, even if it's just a tiny bit. But eventually, you cross a threshold. Look closely at Unit 6 in our source data. At Unit 6, the marginal utility drops below zero to -3 utils. That means eating that sixth mango or that sixth slice of pizza actually made you feel physically worse. You overate, and your total utility curve physically begins to drop. Right between those two phases lies a completely critical economic tipping point, the point of satiation. This is the exact moment, right at the fifth unit in our data, where marginal utility hits exactly zero. At this precise moment, your total utility is at its absolute maximum. You are perfectly full. Eating one more bite will actually make your total satisfaction go down. You have mathematically maximized the want-satisfying power of that commodity. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. If our marginal satisfaction with literally anything, whether it's pizza, video games, clothing, is mathematically guaranteed to eventually diminish and hit zero, how should we allocate our very next dollar? How do we balance our budget across a bunch of different commodities to maximize our total happiness in life? Well, economics has an answer for that too, called the law of equi-marginal utility. But hey, that is an explainer for another day. Thank you so much for joining me to decode the math of satisfaction. I'm pretty sure you're never going to look at a slice of pizza the exact same way again.